Liverpool have just won the Premier League and there's a lot to be impressed about the way they did it. For one, they had a brand new coach who was able to continue the legacy of his predecessor without any drop-off. But perhaps more impressively, they did it without really spending any money in the transfer market at all. Which means they're really well set heading into the summer to be able to spend the kind of money they need to make a title defence next season. That's right, this is Sensible Transfers, where we look for weaknesses in squads and identify solutions to those problems. Remember, this is not what we think the clubs will do, it's what we think they should do. But speaking of what they will do, Liverpool have already been busy in the transfer market fixing some of the problems that we talked about last January. First and foremost, they've made moves to diversify their goal production so that they won't be as reliant on Mohamed Salah going forward, submitting a €130 million bid for Leverkusen's Florian Wirtz, probably the most exciting attacking profile on the market this window. And then they've addressed the fullback situation, which was lingering in the background across the course of last season. Trent Alexander-Arnold's move to Real Madrid was one of the worst kept secrets in world football. But the club have quickly replaced him with another Leverkusen player, Jeremie Frimpong, who will join Conor Bradley to cover the right-back slot. On the other side of the pitch, the left-back position was probably the weakest part of Liverpool's starting 11, and the club are targeting Bournemouth's Milos Kerkez to add strength there. But there is an area that we touched on back in January that still hasn't been resolved: centre-back depth. Of course, Liverpool haven't just been improving their squad through sensible signings, they've been improving their squad through sensible contract extensions as well, with Virgil van Dijk signing a 2-year extension back in April. But while this is a boost in the immediate term, it does pose some challenges to the recruitment department as to how they're going to solve this centre-back situation going forward. Liverpool are already a little thin on the ground when it comes to the centre-back position, with only 4 players covering the 2 positions, and 3 of them preferring to play on the right-hand side. Now, bringing in a player at a comparable level to Virgil van Dijk wouldn't be an easy task, given he's been one of the best centre-backs in the world for a number of years. Looking at the market, there's probably only 2 candidates who wouldn't represent a step down for Liverpool: William Pacho at PSG and Alessandro Bastoni at Inter. Now, it's unlikely that Pacho could be prized away from PSG at this point in time, but with Simone Inzaghi's future at Inter up for speculation, there's probably never been a better time for a big club to try and get Alessandro Bastoni. But with Van Dijk staying on, there's no chance that Liverpool could bring in this kind of like-for-like replacement until his contract's up, which poses a question about how they should use the next couple of seasons to minimise the impact of him leaving. One option would be to simply wait for 2 years, bring in a backup left centre-back option to boost squad depth, and then hope that there are good enough replacements in the market by the time that Van Dijk's contract runs out. The problem with this approach is that you need to find someone who's good enough to play regularly, given that they'll be backing up a player who's going to be 34 years old by the time next season comes around, but also one who's willing to spend time on the bench behind a player who will start if he's fit. Someone who could be good enough to play regularly for Liverpool in this position is Alessandro Buongiorno at Napoli, who helped Antonio Conte's side to the Scudetto this season. Buongiorno is a nice fit for the Liverpool left centre-back role. Although he isn't as good on the ball as Van Dijk, particularly passing over longer distances, he's been comfortable in build-up for a team who've generally looked to control games with the ball this season. And off the ball, he would be perfect for an Arne Slot team. Buongiorno is more aggressive than Van Dijk and likes to step out to challenge opponents, which may explain why he has a higher volume of tackles than Van Dijk this season. And while this aggression can lead to situations where he gets rolled by opponents, more often than not he comes out on top in these moments. He also has a nice physical profile relative to Van Dijk and is good in the air, which is fundamental for a slot centre-back. The problem is that although Buongiorno is not an elite option right now, he's probably still too good to accept a backup role even with the promise of increasing minutes. On top of which, with a contract that runs to 2029 and a release clause in the region of about €70 million, he's just far too expensive to be sensible. Which just goes to show how difficult this sort of solution could be to pull off. To make it work, you probably need to compromise on really top-end quality and look for an older player who's willing to spend a couple of seasons on the bench. Someone like David Hanko, who played for Slot at Feyenoord. Another option would be to bring in a younger player who could develop over the course of Van Dijk's contract and be ready to replace him once he leaves. Now, in principle, this sounds like the perfect solution, but it's easier said than done. With Dean Howson now off the market, there aren't a huge amount of young prospects who are guaranteed to make the step up at left centre-back. Sporting's Gonzalo Inacio and Nottingham Forest's Murillo are probably the 2 best options on paper here, but there are problems with both. Inacio has spent his career playing in a back 3 for a dominant side, and so there's questions about whether or not he'd be able to port over into a back 4. And on top of this, he lacks some of the physical and aerial qualities that Slot likes. Murillo is a fit from a physical standpoint and has experience as a starting level player in the Premier League, but it's hard to know how well he would scale into a possession-heavy back line from a first-pass forward side like Forest. Not to mention that Liverpool would have to pay a Premier League premium for him. A more affordable option might be someone like Konstantinos Kouliarakis at Wolfsburg. Only 21 years old, Kouliarakis played more minutes for his club than any other outfield player last season. However, although he has a lot of potential, he's not really at the level where Slot might be happy throwing him in from the start, which could be an issue if Van Dijk gets injured next season. Perhaps the best option here then is to find a middle point between these two solutions, which is why my sensible pick is Nico Schlotterbeck of Borussia Dortmund. Schlotterbeck would immediately be a starting level player for Liverpool. Although he's a good out of possession profile for Slot, his real upside comes on the ball, where he's an elite progressor both through passing and carries. In fact, he's probably the best ball progressor in his position in the world. Normally this would put him out of reach of Liverpool until Van Dijk's contract was up. But back in April, he sustained a meniscus tear on his left knee, which will keep him out until late next season. This could present Liverpool with an opportunity. With Schlotterbeck's contract running out in 2027, they could leverage his injury into picking him up fairly cheaply, and then use his rehabilitation period to slowly work him into the starting 11. Of course, there's always a risk in signing an injured player, but by balancing this risk off against Van Dijk's contract, this could be a sensible transfer. The other area of concern for Liverpool heading into the new season is the midfield, particularly in the deeper midfield position where Slot used Ryan Gravenberch for most of the last campaign. In the end, Gravenberch played over 3,000 minutes in the league, and by the end it was clear that the physical demands had started to take their toll. And although Wataru Endo was used as a substitute 20 times in the league, he still ended up with less than 300 minutes in total. And so a rotation option for Gravenberch would help alleviate the pressure on the 23-year-old. Of course, Alexis Mac Allister could be used for depth if needed, and Stefan Bajcetic is returning from a couple of admittedly underwhelming loan spells. But this presents Slot with a nice opportunity to bring a different kind of profile into his midfield to add a bit of diversity. One option might be to bring in more of a defensive specialist who could be used in games where Slot wanted a bit more out of possession control. This makes a degree of sense. Not only was Slot a little bit concerned about Gravenberch's defensive ability at first, something he's much less concerned about now, in most of his seasons at Feyenoord, he had a more defensive profile in the deeper position. Players like Jens Tunstra, Mats Wiefer or Ramiz Zarouki. A nice pickup in the market this summer in this profile would be Joao Palhinha at Bayern Munich. Although he was only signed by Bayern last year, he hasn't been able to break into the starting 11 and might be looking for a move away. But perhaps the bigger issue that Liverpool will have to face in this part of the pitch is the loss of Trent Alexander-Arnold. Although he was operating out of the fullback area, Alexander-Arnold brought a lot of ball progression to the team through his passing. Jeremie Frimpong won't replicate this to the same extent, and so the option of a more progressive passer in the midfield space might help Liverpool make up for it. A nice option this season is Nicola Rovella, who's currently at Juventus, but who's been on loan at Lazio this season. Interestingly, he's another one of those players who started out further up the pitch, but has gradually dropped back. As a result, he does share a lot of the same qualities as Gravenberch, particularly when it comes to their ability to carry the ball, but he is a better all-round passer than Gravenberch, and he has the ability to control tempo with the ball, which is something that Slot will no doubt appreciate. Now, the defensive side is the weakest part of Rovella's game, but he is still good at it. Aggressive and a willing runner, he's put up good numbers for Lazio this season. Rovella then would be a good rotation option for Liverpool in games where they wanted more possession control with a greater level of progressive passing. But the problem here is that Lazio have an obligation to buy on Rovella, which wouldn't make him impossible to get, but would probably price him out of the range of a sensible transfer for Liverpool. Because of this, my sensible transfer pick is Atalanta's Ederson. Ederson is eminently gettable this summer. He's also a really nice profile fit. Ederson is an excellent progressive passer, which means he would be adding something to Liverpool's midfield. He also offers the kind of out-of-possession presence that Slot likes, and even though his defensive numbers have been a little low this season, this is an outlier across his career. And for example, his tackling success against dribblers has remained good throughout. This, along with the fact that Liverpool could probably sign him for a nice fee, means that Ederson is a sensible transfer. So those are my sensible transfer picks, and this is what Liverpool would look like after the summer if I was in charge. Now, it looks very similar to what Liverpool looked like last season, but with the players that Liverpool have been linked with now in the starting 11. But my sensible picks give a little bit more squad depth and give trajectory to the future for Liverpool to make them even better. JJ is up next with his sensible picks for Newcastle, but if you can't wait until then for your transfer fix, why not check out the deal sheet on the Athletics website, or tune into the Athletics Week in Football, which has got dedicated deal sheet shows across the whole summer. Bye!
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.